Asha woke to the harsh shrill of her alarm clock. The time on the screen blinked 5:02 a.m., its sudden, jarring noise cutting through the otherwise quiet darkness of her small apartment. She groaned softly, reaching for the snooze button. The room was cold, and so was the silence that engulfed her. There were no morning greetings or warm sounds of breakfast being prepared. Just the hum of a refrigerator that barely worked and the creaking of floorboards beneath her tired feet. The world outside hadn't yet stirred, but Asha had no time to waste. The weight of her day already pressed heavily on her shoulders. She sat up on her mattress, letting her legs swing to the side, and touched the floor. The coolness of the wood sent a shiver up her spine. Her apartment, a small, modest space in a rundown building, was all she could afford. And yet, it was hers. She shared it with her younger sister, Layla, who was still fast asleep in the next room. Layla's textbooks, scattered across the floor, were a reminder of the future Asha hoped for her, a future far removed from the hardships they had known. Asha paused for a moment, gazing at her sister's sleeping form. Layla was only 16 and still held on to youthful dreams. She wasn't burdened by the weight of responsibility that Asha carried daily. But Asha knew that her sister's future depended on her. 7 years ago, their lives had been torn apart by tragedy. Their parents, both gone in a late-night car accident, left Asha to step into the role of caregiver. At just 17, Asha had been forced to forego a prestigious scholarship to a hospitality school to take care of Layla. Since then, Asha had traded in textbooks for trays and exams for exhaustion. There was no room for dreams in her world, not when survival was all that mattered. Her days revolved around making sure Layla had food to eat, the rent was paid, and the weight of their grief didn't pull them under. She had given up on her own ambitions, knowing that her sister's dreams were the ones that mattered now. Today was no different. The familiar routine awaited her. She dressed quickly in her worn uniform from Lavish Fork, a high-end restaurant located in the heart of downtown San Francisco. The shirt was a size too big, its fabric thinned from countless washes, but she pressed it anyway, smoothing out the wrinkles as if they were metaphorical reminders of her life. The faint scent of truffle oil clung to her clothes, a scent that would soon surround her once again. Asha's hair was neatly pinned back, and her makeup, though minimal, was carefully applied. Presentation mattered at Lavish Fork, a place where appearances spoke louder than resumes. Her skin, dark and beautiful, often spoke before she could. Asha knew she had to present herself perfectly, always poised, always composed. The world wasn't kind to people like her, and she had learned to navigate the restaurant world with quiet grace and resilience. The bus ride downtown was uneventful, filled with the tired faces of workers who, like her, were invisible to the city. The janitors, kitchen staff, caregivers, all the people who made the city run before it even woke up. They were all just faces in the crowd, overlooked and underappreciated. But Asha had long since stopped caring about being seen. She did her job, kept her head down, and made sure to give her best, even if no one ever acknowledged it. When she arrived at Lavish Fork, Asha slipped through the back entrance, past the frosted glass and velvet ropes that never had her name on them. The restaurant's exterior gleamed with the polished pretensions of the wealthy, but Asha knew the truth. It was all just an illusion. The glass doors swung open with the softest of whispers, letting her into a world where she was expected to be perfect, no questions asked. Her manager, Gregory Hensley, was already pacing near the host's stand. He was a man who embodied the rules of the restaurant. A sharp jawline, a clipboard always in hand, and eyes that never met hers unless something had gone wrong. He looked up as she approached, his face hardening into the usual mask of authority. "You're late," he said flatly, though Asha wasn't. The restaurant didn't open until later, and she had arrived with plenty of time to spare. But Gregory was always ready to find fault, to make her feel small. "You've got Section B," he added. "Make sure you smile. It helps compensate." The pause before the word compensate was deliberate, almost theatrical. Asha met his gaze briefly. swallowing the retort that burned in her throat. She had long since learned to bite her tongue when it came to Gregory. He never spoke to the other servers like that. Not to Claire, who spent her shifts texting and ignoring customers, or even who had shown up high last Friday and still managed to get the Saturday night shift. But Asha wasn't given that luxury. She was always held to a higher standard, one that wasn't applied equally to others. Without a word, Asha nodded, walking away from Gregory's cold stare. She set to work immediately, slipping behind the bar, then into the dining area, balancing trays of food, all while managing the tempers of demanding customers. The restaurant was already buzzing with life, the polished floors gleaming, the white linens pristine. Truffle oil scented the air, and entitlement sat at every table like an invisible guest. Asha floated through the room, her voice a soft melody of course, ma'am, and right away, sir. She was efficient, intuitive, and warm, but to the customers, she was invisible. They barely glanced at her when they spoke. Some refused to make eye contact altogether. One man, a regular, always called her girl, no matter how many times she introduced herself. "Hey girl," he barked that morning. "More lemon in my water next time." Asha's smile didn't falter, but her fingers trembled slightly as she refilled the glass. It was the small indignities like this that wore her down, the constant reminder that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she gave, she would always be overlooked. There were small moments of grace, a middle-aged couple who tipped well and asked about her sister, a solo diner who always left a kind note on the receipt. But they were fleeting, flickers of light in a place that often made her feel like a shadow. As the morning turned to afternoon, Asha took a brief 5-minute break near the service exit. She sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, leaning against the cold wall, letting herself breathe. The ache in her lower back was sharp, a reminder of the long shifts and short sleep. But it wasn't just the physical tiredness that gnawed at her. It was the constant necessity to prove herself, to show she belonged in a place that never truly wanted her there. Not as herself, not as a young black woman with dreams long deferred. But still, when the bell chimed, signaling a new guest, Asha straightened her posture, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and stepped back into the dining room. The world around her didn't stop, and neither would she. Because that's what Asha Carter did. She showed up, no matter how heavy the silence around her became. The afternoon sun had started to settle into a harsh, unrelenting light, casting long shadows across the white linen tables of Lavish Fork. The hustle of the busy restaurant seemed to reach a new fever pitch with the arrival of a famous film actor, trailed by an army of paparazzi. The sudden surge of attention made Asha feel even more invisible. She was just another server in the sea of faces, one of many working behind the scenes, trying to get by. But today, it felt different. Today, something would happen that would change everything. Asha had been balancing a tray of artisanal sliders for a table of executives when she caught sight of the young boy sitting at a corner table. Ethan Langford, the son of a wealthy businessman named Jordan Langford, was seated with his father, looking rigid and unnervingly still. His eyes were wide, his breath shallow, and his hands trembled slightly, gripped tightly around the edge of the tablecloth. Ethan was not enjoying the grand spectacle of the day. He was overwhelmed, his sensory processing disorder making it impossible for him to tolerate the flashing lights and chaotic noise of the restaurant. The flashes from the paparazzi outside the windows seemed to have a magnetic effect on the boy's distress. His eyes darted to the sudden bursts of light and back to the people around him. His small body began to shake, and he rocked gently in his seat, his face contorting with anxiety. Asha watched, the corners of her mind snapping into focus. This wasn't a typical child's tantrum. This was something far more intense. She had seen it before with her cousin's son, who also struggled with sensory processing disorder, SPD. She knew the signs too well. Ethan wasn't just upset. He was in a full sensory meltdown. Instinct kicked in. Asha couldn't stand by and watch the boy spiral into deeper distress. She knew that if no one intervened soon, he would hurt himself. Asha placed the tray on the nearest table with swift grace, momentarily ignoring the indignant glare from a businessman who was waiting for his lunch. She rushed to Ethan's side. His breaths were coming faster now, ragged and uneven. He began to claw at the fabric of his shirt, his face scrunching with pain. The tears welled in his eyes as his little hands grabbed at his collar, trying desperately to escape the chaos in his mind. His father, Jordan, was just a few feet away, but he was caught up in a phone call, oblivious to the distress his son was experiencing. Asha's heart ached as she knelt beside the boy, her voice soft but steady, trying to soothe him. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, trying to steady her hands as she reached out to him. "You're okay. You're safe." She gently placed a linen napkin over his eyes, shielding him from the flickering flashes of light, and her other hand reached out, carefully holding his trembling arm to steady him. "Breathe with me," she said in a soft, rhythmic voice. In and out, just like waves. The world around her seemed to disappear, the clinking of silverware, the laughter of guests, the sharp voice of her manager. None of it mattered. All that mattered was Ethan, who was now curled into himself, struggling against his own body's distress. Suddenly, a voice cut through the fragile calm. "Miss Carter." The sharpness of the voice stopped Asha in her tracks. It was her manager, Gregory Hensley, storming toward her. His face was tight with anger, and his eyes narrowed with disapproval. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was raised now, loud enough to draw attention. "You've abandoned your station to babysit. Is this how you prioritize your responsibilities?" Asha stood up, but she didn't back away from Ethan. Her hand remained gently on his shoulder, as if her presence alone could offer him some small comfort. "The child was hurting himself," she said, her voice firm but calm. "He was bleeding. I couldn't wait for someone else to notice." Gregory's lips twisted into a scowl. "And you thought you'd just abandon your table? This is a high-end restaurant, not a daycare. You get paid to serve, not to play hero. Get back to your section and leave the child's tantrum to his father." Asha's pulse quickened. The words stung, but she didn't let them show on her face. She was used to Gregory's condescending attitude, but today it felt like too much. She turned briefly to see the tall, imposing figure of Jordan Langford stepping out of the dining room, his phone still in hand. Asha felt a sense of relief when she saw him approach his son, kneeling down beside Ethan. But even as he gently spoke to his son, Asha couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Gregory was still standing there, glaring at her, waiting for her to comply. But Asha couldn't move, couldn't pull herself away from the boy who still trembled beneath her touch. "Mr. Hensley," she said slowly, looking directly into his eyes. "If that were your child, would you have walked away?" For a split second, Gregory's expression faltered. It was brief, just a flicker, but it was enough for Asha to see that he hadn't expected her to challenge him. His gaze shifted to Jordan, who had now wrapped his arms around Ethan, whispering words of comfort. "That's not the point," Gregory snapped, his voice cutting through the room. "The point is, you are paid to serve, not to make a scene." Before Asha could respond, Jordan stood up, his gaze meeting hers. His face was full of gratitude and surprise. He didn't speak immediately, but when he did, his words were unexpected. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "Thank you for looking after him." Gregory's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stepped back, muttering something under his breath about policy and professionalism. Asha stood there, still uncertain about what would happen next, but knowing deep in her heart that she had done the right thing. Jordan took out a business card from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "I don't think we've been properly introduced," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm Jordan Langford. I'd like to speak to you later." Asha nodded, still reeling from the exchange. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she couldn't deny the gravity of the moment. Gregory was glaring at her now, his face a mix of frustration and disbelief. He shook his head, clearly angry at the disruption, and muttered under his breath, "Consider this your last shift, Miss Carter." Ash's breath caught in her throat. She had been fired, just like that, in front of everyone. The restaurant that she had given so much to had tossed her aside like an expendable part of the machinery. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, still in shock, trying to process the words that had just come from Gregory's mouth. Her eyes shifted to the man at the bar, the tall gentleman who had spoken up earlier. He gave her a small nod, one of quiet approval, before turning back to his drink. Ash's gaze lingered for a moment longer before she turned back to Ethan and his father. Jordan had already left the restaurant, his son in his arms. For a moment, Asha just stood there, her legs heavy, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. She had done the right thing, but still, her world was crumbling before her eyes. She had lost her job. She had lost her sense of stability. And yet, in the midst of it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end for her. It couldn't be. The ride home was longer than usual, though the route hadn't changed. Asha sat by the window on the bus, staring out into the blur of the city as it passed by in fits of lights and shadows. The glass was streaked with grime, the world beyond smeared and indistinct, much like how she felt in that moment. The cold air rushed in through the cracks of the bus's windows, but it did little to numb the ache that spread through her chest. The events of the afternoon swirled in her mind like a storm. Her heart still pounded from the confrontation with Gregory, from the moment she was fired for something she knew, deep down, she had done right. Her hands trembled as she gripped the straps of her worn-out bag, the plastic name tag that had once identified her as part of the lavish Fork team, now an unwanted weight. She wanted to tear it off, to rid herself of the last vestiges of a place that had discarded her so quickly, but instead, she held on to it. It felt like a reminder of everything she had given, everything she had sacrificed, and everything that had been ripped away from her in an instant. At home, the smell of instant ramen hit her the moment she stepped through the door. It was a familiar, comforting scent, the kind that filled the apartment every night when Layla came home after school. The soft hum of her sister's voice, singing along to a song playing on her phone, drifted from the other room. Asha hesitated at the door, her shoes still on, her body heavy with exhaustion. She didn't want to ruin her sister's night, not when Layla was so focused on her studies, her life still ahead of her, untouched by the world's harsh realities. Asha called out, her voice forced to sound light, practiced. "Everything okay in there?" Her tone was forced, but Layla's response was easy, casual. "Studying, but I made you a bowl. It's on the counter." The simple act of kindness made Asha's chest tighten. Layla, with her bright eyes and endless potential, deserved so much more than this life. She deserved stability, a future that wasn't burdened by the weight of survival. Asha could feel the crushing pressure of it all, the constant exhaustion, the late nights, the worry that never went away. She didn't want to burden her sister with the realities of what had just happened, but she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of defeat that weighed her down. She walked to the kitchen, her mind still racing. Layla's voice echoed faintly from the other room as Asha stood in front of the small, chipped bowl of noodles. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, the weight of the day pressing down on her. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but it wouldn't go away. The sting of Gregory's words still lingered, how quickly she had been dismissed, how easily they had chosen rules over humanity. It wasn't just the job she had lost. It was the hope, the sense of purpose she had clung to, that was slipping away. Asha didn't eat the food Layla had made. She couldn't. Her mind was too occupied, too full of the conflicting emotions that surged through her. She should have been angry, furious at the injustice of it all. But instead, there was this deep, empty ache. The doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she had done the wrong thing, that maybe compassion wasn't hers to offer, that the world didn't have room for people like her, not when it came to making hard choices. She sat there in the dim kitchen, her thoughts swirling, until the phone rang. The sound sliced through the quiet, pulling Asha out of her thoughts. Her first instinct was to ignore it. She didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to face another rejection, another reminder that she had failed. But the phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside her made her reach for it. She picked up the phone, her heart beating faster. "Hello." Asha's voice was shaky, unsure. "Hi, is this Asha Carter?" The voice on the other end was calm, warm, but unfamiliar. It took her a moment to recognize it. "This is Preston Langford," the voice continued. "I'm Ethan's father from Lavish Fork. I wanted to apologize for what happened today." Asha's breath caught in her throat. She had forgotten about Ethan and his father, caught up in her own turmoil. But now, hearing Preston's voice, her emotions shifted. "I don't know if you remembered," he went on, "but when you helped Ethan today, you showed more compassion than anyone else in that room. I've been thinking about it all day. I know you were fired for doing the right thing, and I want to make it right." Asha's mind raced as she processed his words. She had expected nothing more than a polite thank you, a brief acknowledgement. But this was something entirely different. She felt a sense of relief, a glimmer of hope rising within her. "Mr. Langford, I didn't expect this. I just did what I thought was right." "I know," Preston said, "and that's why I'm calling. I'm not sure if you know this, but I own Langford Enterprises. We've been reevaluating our company's culture, the way we treat people, especially those in the service industry. After what happened with Ethan today, I realized that we need people like you on our team. People with heart, with the courage to do what's right, no matter the cost. I'd like to offer you a position with us, not as a waitress, but as a leadership trainee. We'll pay for you to finish your degree in business management, and you'll work closely with our senior team to help us reshape how we hire, how we treat our employees, how we create a workplace that values humanity over profit. What do you think?" Asha was stunned. She sat there, speechless, the phone pressed against her ear. This was too much. A job offer, a chance to change everything, a future she never could have imagined. She was being offered a chance to rebuild her life, to create a future not defined by survival, but by possibility. I don't know what to say," Asha whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Are you sure? I'm just a waitress. I'm not." "Don't sell yourself short, Asha," Preston interrupted. "You're more than that, and I see the potential in you. I want you to help us change the way things are done." Tears welled in Asha's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to let her vulnerability show. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say, but thank you." Preston's voice softened. "Meet me tomorrow morning, and we'll talk more. I owe you a proper conversation, and maybe even a new beginning." The call ended, and for a long moment, Asha sat there, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Her life had just taken a turn she never expected, a turn that was filled with hope and opportunity. But as she sat there, she knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a future worth fighting for. And so, Asha stood up from the table, her hands trembling, but this time not from fear. This time, it was from the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been wrong about everything. She wasn't invisible. She had been seen, truly seen. And this was her chance to finally step into the light. The morning light broke through the city's skyline as Asha stood outside Langford Enterprises, her breath caught in her throat. The world felt so much bigger than it had in her tiny apartment, so much larger than her small, humble existence. The building she stood before was a giant of glass and steel, a symbol of the very world that had once felt unreachable. She wasn't sure how it happened, but somehow she had gone from the shadows of Lavish Fork, the restaurant where she'd been dismissed without a second thought, to this high rise, surrounded by opportunity and change. It was as if she had stepped into a new chapter of her life, one she had never written but had always dreamed of. As she walked into the building's sleek lobby, her heart began to beat faster. The receptionist greeted her with a smile, and before long, she was heading up to the 12th floor, where she had first met Preston Langford just a few weeks ago. The elevator hummed softly as it carried her upward, her palms slick with nervousness. She had worked her whole life to survive. What did it mean to actually live for something more? When the elevator doors opened, Asha found herself stepping into a world far different from the restaurant's gleaming but cold atmosphere. The offices of Langford Enterprises were bright and inviting, filled with natural light that poured in through the tall windows. Everything felt polished, but not in the same sterile way that Lavish Fork had been. There was a warmth to this space, an openness that welcomed ideas, collaboration, and most importantly, change. Preston was waiting for her in his office, standing as she entered with a warm, almost relieved smile. "Asha, I'm glad you're here," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I know these past few weeks have been a whirlwind, but today we take the next step." Asha sat down in the chair opposite him, her heart still racing. The surreal nature of this all hadn't worn off. Every time she thought about how she had gone from a stressed-out server at a high-end restaurant to being a leadership trainee at a major company, it felt like a dream. She had spent years running on fumes, making sure Layla was taken care of, pushing her own dreams to the side. Now she was being given a chance to do something different, something that would change not just her life, but the lives of others around her. "You've done an incredible job so far, Asha," Preston continued, his voice calm but filled with respect. "Your perspective is exactly what we need. Langford Enterprises is growing, but we need to evolve. We need to be a company that not only cares about profit, but cares about people, the ones who make this place what it is. That's where you come in." Asha blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just a server," she said softly, the words feeling foreign now. "I never thought I'd be in a position like this. I'm not sure I belong here." Preston leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "That's exactly why you belong here, Asha. You've seen the struggles, you've experienced firsthand what it's like to be overlooked. You know what it feels like to fight for your seat at the table, and you understand the value of compassion. We need people like you, people who aren't afraid to speak up, people who understand that real leadership isn't about authority. It's about creating a space where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued." Asha felt her chest tighten as his words sank in. She had always believed that leadership came with power, with titles, and with the authority to make decisions from a place of privilege. But what Preston was saying was something entirely different. Leadership in this new world was about connection, empathy, and inclusion. It was about seeing people for who they were, not just what they could contribute. "I want you to take the next step with us," Preston said, standing up. "We've got a new restaurant opening, and I want you to help us launch it. This isn't just about serving food. It's about creating an experience. It's about building a culture from the ground up, one that values every person who walks through those doors, from the dishwasher to the CEO. You'll lead the training. You'll shape the way we hire, the way we treat our staff, and the way we interact with our customers. This is your chance to make the changes you've always wanted to see." Asha's mind was racing. The idea of building something from scratch, of shaping a company's culture and ethos, seemed so far beyond anything she had ever imagined. But there was a part of her that felt a deep stirring, an excitement, a spark of possibility that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had always put others first, always sacrificed her own dreams to ensure Layla had a chance. But now, this was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, training sessions, and late nights. Asha worked closely with the senior team, collaborating with the HR department, chefs, and the entire restaurant staff to design a new kind of hospitality experience. One built on respect, transparency, and empathy. She wasn't just learning about the business. She was teaching, creating, and fostering an environment where people could be themselves, where they wouldn't just be seen as cogs in a machine. But the work wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of frustration, when things didn't go as planned, or when the old habits of the company seemed too deeply ingrained to change. Asha found herself questioning if she was truly the right person for the job. She had spent so many years learning how to survive in a world that didn't always welcome her. She wasn't used to leading, to being at the forefront of something important. But with every challenge, with every setback, she reminded herself of why she was here. She wasn't just building a restaurant. She was building a future, one where kindness and integrity weren't optional, but foundational. As the restaurant began to take shape, Asha saw the impact of her work. The staff felt more valued, more empowered. They didn't just serve food. They created an experience. Customers noticed the difference. They came back, not just for the food, but for the feeling they got when they walked in. It wasn't just about luxury or exclusivity. It was about warmth, connection, and community. People came in for more than a meal. They came for a sense of belonging. One day, as the grand opening approached, Asha found herself standing in front of the restaurant's sleek glass doors, looking out at the bustling city. She was no longer the young woman who had been fired for doing the right thing. She wasn't the server who had once thought her future was limited to cleaning tables and carrying trays. She was the woman who had helped build something meaningful, something that would leave a lasting impact. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marisol, her mentor, reminding her to breathe. "You've earned this," Marisol's message read. "Trust yourself." The night of the grand opening, as the restaurant's doors swung open to the eager crowd, Asha stood beside Preston. She watched as the staff, a team she had built and nurtured, welcomed the guests with smiles and warmth. The place was alive, not just with the sound of clinking glasses and laughter, but with something deeper, something that could only come from the foundation of trust and respect that had been laid. Preston turned to Asha and smiled. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You did it." Asha's heart swelled with pride too. It wasn't just the success of the night that mattered. It was the journey she had taken to get here. From the quiet waitress at Lavish Fork to the leadership associate who helped launch a restaurant that would redefine the industry, Asha had found her place. She had found her voice. And in doing so, she had found the future she had always dreamed of, a future where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. And as she stood there, surrounded by the bustling energy of the restaurant and the laughter of the people she had helped bring together, Asha knew that this was just the beginning. She had built something lasting, something she could be proud of, a future that was entirely her own.